Hey everybody out there, let me know if you can hear me. I'm taking a look at another one of these Jim Lill videos. He did one about Tonewood last week or recently, and it turned out pretty good. He just wants to test things. This is pretty cool. So this one's called Tested. Where does the sustain come from in an electric guitar? And I'm hoping in a not too distant future I'm going to be talking with Ethan Weiner and everybody about this. So let me go on for now.
In the last video I put out, I did a bunch of tests to try to figure out which parts of the electric guitar are responsible for the tone, and people liked it. I did see some comments that had the word sustain in them, and the people who wrote these comments seemed very concerned about the thought of something affecting the guitar's sustain.
So he did do a Tonewood video, and it's really good, so check it out.
I never really think about sustain, but I can see how it'd be a bummer if you wanted to play a note this long and your guitar was only capable of a note this long. So I'm as interested as you guys are in figuring out where the sustain comes from. Since you guys think about sustain more than me, I asked for some examples of good sustain and put together this list.
Okay, so this is really, I don't know. I've had sustain problems before, but it was almost always because either the string was dead or something wasn't solid enough. Like the nut was a little bit bumpy or just wasn't making good contact. And that's usually what gives me the bad sustain, is something that dampens the vibration of the string. So I'm not sure, and they sell all these things like these weights that you're supposed to put on your guitar that's supposed to help your sustain or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. So let's see what he finds out.
List of songs where long notes are held out and people like it.
So they gave him a list of songs with long notes. I'm trying to think of some long note that I mean, I know sometimes like artificial harmonics die too early, or you bend and it notes out or whatever.
But there are a couple wrinkles thrown in. U2 apparently used a special guitar that had a device that lets it ring forever, so that doesn't really count.
And what is that? Is that a Fernandez Sustainiac or whatever? Is it still a thing? Sustainiac? Sustainiac. Sustainiac. Oh, interesting. Well, that's probably what's doing it.
And the rest of the examples sound to me like they use amp feedback. Feedback is when the amp is so loud in the room that the air shakes the strings and the note just keeps going. Maybe some guitars are more capable of feedback than others. Maybe some can't do it at all. I don't know. But I have 4 guitars and an amp that gets pretty loud, so let's see how loud it needs to be for each guitar to get feedback going. So that might be the sound in your head when you think guitar sustain, but then again it might not, so there are more tests to be done that don't involve the guitar getting help from the amp feedback. I'll start with a...
So, yeah, when we're talking about sustain, are we actually talking about the natural sustain of the guitar, or are we talking about sustainiacs or feedback or something else that might modify how long that string rings?
Simple test where I strum each guitar and see how long it rings.
So his test, which is going to be hard to do apples to apples, is going to be, picking. And all the God of the Gaps people are going to just say, oh, he picked it totally different. That's why they sound totally different.
Every guitar plugged in rang for more than 35 seconds, and I don't think I've ever played a 35-second long note before.
Yeah, I think I'd be okay if mine got 35 seconds. What do you guys say? I mean, I've had sustained problems before, but I swear it was either a bend and it coming noting out, or yeah. Sometimes I'm not so good with the dive bombs anymore. Sometimes I have to kind of die on a dive bomb.
To figure out how many seconds I actually need to be able to get out of a guitar. The longest note in a song that I usually play is called a diamond, which means you hit it and hold it out for a whole bar. The slowest songs that I've played are around 60 beats per minute, which means 4 seconds per bar, so I'm thinking 4 seconds is about as long a note as I'll ever need to play, especially without feedback helping. You might not think that 4 seconds is a long time, but here's what a 4-second long note sounds like in music. So instead of saying this guitar sustains for 35 seconds, I bet what most people are looking for is the quality of sustain in those first 4 seconds. And the best way I can think of to test this is to strum a guitar and measure the peak volume at the start of the note, and then measure the peak volume at 4 seconds and see how much it drops during that time.
All right, so if you did it this way, you could probably normalize to peak, right? Even though it's not going to be perfect probably, but it's going to be pretty close. And so he's trying to look at the relative distance between the peak volume and where it drops. That's actually pretty good. This is a hard test to do. Again, you got to pick it just as hard. You got to pick it in the exact same place. So everybody's going to say that there's too many flaws. But, you know, I mean, if a phenomenon is so important that you should really worry about it, you're going to be able to hear it under a wide range of conditions. If it's really hard to hear, I'm not sure that's one of those phenomena you need to worry about.
The volume drops, the better sustain the guitar has. But there are so many ways to strum a guitar. If I did this, I'd have to do this for all 4 guitars, doing an open strum versus just the low E string versus just the high E string, strumming normal versus hard versus soft, strumming normal versus near the bridge versus near the neck, strumming with a pick versus with a finger, and then doing this direct and then into a low gain amp and into a high gain amp. So that's 4 times 3 times 6 times 3 equals 216 different strums that I'd have to do, all measured at 0 seconds and at 4 seconds, and taking the difference, meaning 648 different pieces of data. So I did that, and here's my spreadsheet. I've never taken a statistics class, so I don't know all the right words for looking at this and turning it into something useful, but I'll point out some trends that I see. First off, the strum and low E note were pretty close to each other in every test, but the high E note always had significantly less sustain. Another thing you can see here is how much better each guitar sustained when played into a low gain amp instead of just direct into the computer.
Okay, so let's look at this. High gain amp is kind of hard to tell, but
and completely clean, and then each guitar sustained even better than that when played into a high gain amp. Also, and this is kind of a big one, when played direct, every guitar had more sustain when played soft, but when played into either the low or high gain amp, every guitar had more sustain when played hard.
So you remember that? Like, I used to play with those really thin picks, and those chords would come out all nice and ring for forever. But they're saying that a harder pick is better for that. And lately I've been learning hard picks so I can do like sweeps and stuff. Let's see. Go on from here.
That's weird, right? How can a hard strum sustain less than a soft strum? Then when put through an amp, it flip-flops.
That is weird. So we're saying if you're strumming softly, it'll sustain a lot longer. If you strum hard, it's going to last longer on the distorted amp. But, you know, really, you can only go so far with that before you're clipping off the top.
Amp is distorting it all. It's chopping the tops and bottoms off the wave, so the difference between the loudest parts and quietest parts is less than before. So we hear this as better sustain because the volume isn't dropping off as much.
That's exactly what it is. So you're not going to have that giant peak at the beginning because it's getting all lopped off. So you can actually normalize it to a hell of a lot louder. And it's the beginning's not going to be that much louder than the end if it's a really gainy thing. You know, that's the whole thing we talk about dynamics, right? I might have to split.
The harder you hit an amp, the more intensely this
a little
happens.
crazy up here.
So this makes me think, if you're playing into an amp that's at least on the edge of breakup, the sustain you get is more determined by how loud a signal is going into the amp versus whether you're playing a Tele or an SG or a Gretsch or whatever. At least that's what the numbers make it look like.
Shoot, I gotta split. Sorry, I'll be back.